Remember these commercials?
There's nothing to it, vote!
Sounds simple, just go vote. But for many Americans, voting is a lot harder than just registering and then popping down to their local polling place on election day, especially if their polling place looks like this, where some people waited up to 5 hours to vote in the primaries for the 2016 presidential election, or just gave up and went to work after the county closed 2/3 of its polling places. And that's just a minor inconvenience compared to what's happening in other parts of the country. Forget Russian interference. Okay, don't actually forget Russian interference. That's important too and should be dealt with. But we're interfering in our own elections. What if your county looked like this? See those 2 dots? Yeah, those would have been the only 2 places to vote in Randolph County, Georgia, after a proposal to close 7 of its 9 polling places. That proposal would have affected people like 76-year-old Lester Harmon, who says he votes every election year at the same place, the Benevolence Fire Station, less than a minute's drive from his house.
Go up the road, you see it on your left.
This year, that polling place would have been closed down. And for the first time in years, Harmon would have had to figure out where he's supposed to vote and get himself there.
If you don't vote, then you ain't got no right.
That proposal was shot down after national cries of race-driven voter suppression. We'll come back to that later. The question is, can jurisdictions just close down the majority of places to vote? Short answer, yes. The shuttering of polling places across the country changes who votes and thus the outcome of elections. Okay, so quick summary. First, polling places are shutting down around the country. Some people think that's really concerning. I'll tell you why, and we'll talk about what it means for voters. So to start, let's go back to Georgia, Randolph County. This was a real proposal this August. Just months before midterm elections, county officials quietly proposed closing 7 of 9 polling places in a predominantly black county. Here are some fun facts about that election. In November, voters in Georgia will choose a governor, either their current Secretary of State, Brian Kemp, a white Republican male, or Stacey Abrams, a black female Democrat. If elected, Abrams would be the country's first ever black female governor, and in Georgia no less, a historically and fanatically Republican state.
I got a big truck, just in case I need to round up criminal illegals and take them home myself. Yep, I just said that.
Reverend Ezekiel Hawley, a local NAACP branch president, was just one of the people speaking out against the plan.
Straight racism. We fought very hard to have the opportunity to vote, and their rights are being taken away.
Here's another fun fact. During the primary, Abrams won 511 votes in Randolph County. Brian Kemp only won 86. Oh, and remember, Kemp is the sitting Secretary of State, so he's the authority over state elections, though counties are allowed to make their own legal decisions on polling places. Rabbit hole here. Secretary Kemp didn't originally win his primary. He came in second. Because of state election laws, they went to a runoff election in late July, where Kemp triumphed and went on to face Abrams. Once this proposal became public and started getting media attention, Kemp did criticize the plan to close these polling places. In a statement to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, he said, "We strongly urged local officials to abandon this effort and focus on preparing for a secure, accessible, and fair election this November." His critics say, too little, too late. And here's another rabbit hole. To make this decision to close the polls, the county hired a consultant named Mike Malone. Malone announced his recommendation to county residents at 2 courtesy meetings back in August, where he also presented some slides, noting also that the final decision was up to election commissioners. This is the actual audio from that meeting, republished by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Here's Mike Malone.
Consolidation has become highly recommended by the Secretary of State.
The Secretary of State, Brian Kemp, the candidate running against Stacey Abrams. Now, we should note here that Malone retracted that statement shortly afterward, that Kemp was recommending consolidation. However, he said it as part of a prepared presentation. It wasn't some off-the-cuff comment. Oh, and Malone donated $250 to Kemp's campaign. And the local newspaper, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, reports that Kemp was the one who recommended Malone for the job, though Kemp has disputed that. Okay, maybe Malone misspoke. Maybe it's all a coincidence. And honestly, we don't know. In that presentation, Malone says 9 precincts for about 4,000 voters is way too many.
There's no disenfranchisement. There's no disenfranchisement for the African Americans. There's no disenfranchisement for the Caucasian community.
You can draw your own conclusions. One more fact though, the County Board of Elections rejected that proposal in a meeting that lasted less than 1 minute. That's my kind of meeting. And 2 days before the meeting, consultant Mike Malone was fired. Why? Well, at least in part because of national outrage and media attention.
Critics called the plan to consolidate polling places a brazen attempt to suppress the black vote in one of the most closely watched races of the 2018 midterms.
The thing is, the county didn't have to decline the proposal. This proposal was perfectly legal. How? It's time to talk about the Supreme Court. June 2013, the Supreme Court handed down a decision called Shelby County v. Holder. The case dealt with the Voting Rights Act, a civil rights era law designed to help minority voters vote. Part of that law said that if a state has a history of discriminatory voting practices, then it has to get federal government approval before changing or closing polling places. It's designed to protect against race-based voter suppression, and it includes a test to figure out which of those states it should apply to, and it used to include Georgia. It also included all these states, and some counties in these states, and 2 townships in Michigan. Here's how CNN explained the decision the day that the Supreme Court announced it.
So now the court is saying the test you had in place is outdated. It goes back to 1965. So much has changed. Our culture has changed. Our society has changed. Other discrimination laws have changed. Hopefully, these states have made substantial progress. So if you're going to do this, you have to rewrite the test, if you will.
Rewriting that test is up to Congress, though, and they haven't brought anything to a vote. So since that Supreme Court decision, how many polling places have closed? Valid question. And you know who else wanted to know? The Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, one of the top civil rights coalitions in the country. After Shelby v. Holder, researchers there put together a massive report looking at about 800 counties previously covered by Section 5. Here's what they found. There was only accurate polling data available for about half of those counties. In them, researchers found that 43% of the counties reduced polling locations, leaving 868 fewer places to vote in 2016 compared with 2012 or 2014. And we don't even know what the other counties did. They don't have to publish that information. Now, look, some will say that some of these poll closures are valid. Population centers have changed. More people are moving into densely populated areas. Old polling places weren't handicap accessible, etc. So, where do we go from here? Well, there are a few options. South Carolina passed a statewide voter transparency law in the aftermath of Shelby. It adds some checks and balances to any polling place changes and also requires that all impacted voters are notified. That's not a thing now. Many states don't have a law requiring voters to be notified if their polling place changed. There are also 2 Voting Rights Act restoration bills pending in Congress. Both have members of Congress from both parties signed on as co-sponsors. Both those bills have stalled out, though. So what do you do while different levels of government are trying to figure this out? Well, with midterms quickly approaching, and with hundreds fewer polling places across the country, double-check where you're supposed to vote and make plans on how to get there. And that's probably more than you wanted to know.